Tonight's principal speaker is author Fred Buechner. About a year ago, we had the pleasure of visiting and taping Fred on his farm in the Green Mountains of Vermont. We saw his study, from which have come a great diversity of novels, stories, and essays. The New York Times has called Fred Buechner the finest Christian writer in America, and I believe them. He's a Presbyterian preacher and storyteller who has written critically acclaimed novels like Godric, The Final Beast, and Brendan. I've read a lot of them. Once I've started one, I have a hard time putting it down. Fred has a clear perception of the challenges and contradictions facing Christianity, and his writing is truly provocative. It's a pleasure to have him with us tonight. Welcome, Fred.
Bless you. Thank you. I've just come back from about a 10-day stint of speaking in the state of Iowa, which was tremendous fun and exhausting. And one of the funnest parts of it was after the readings themselves were over, or the lecture, or whatever it was I was doing, there'd be a question and answer period afterwards where you got a chance to step out from behind the written word and deal with real words and listen to what people have to say and respond to them as best you can. And there are lots of questions that come. I always say, anything you ask me, I'll try to answer, and if I don't know the answer, I will make it up. And one question that is asked almost every time is the question, if I had to sum up what I've been trying to say all these years as a writer in one relatively short space, what would that statement be? And I come prepared with the answer, which is still a true one, and that is, I think if I had to put it in one sentence, I would say that in everything I've written, both fiction and nonfiction, as a preacher or just as a writer, it would be listen to your life. Pay attention to what happens to you. Because it seems to me that if indeed there is a God, which most of the time I believe there is, and if indeed he is concerned with the world, which is what the Christian faith is saying, concerned enough to enter it, to live in it, and to work in it, and to fail it, and succeed in it, and finally die in it, and rise again in it, if he's really involved with the world, he continues to be. And one of the ways he speaks to us, and maybe one of the most powerful ways, is through what happens to us. Which means keep your ears open, keep your eyes open for the often hidden, elusive Word of God. When I think about that, I think of and it's very hard to do that because we get so wrapped up in the business of living. And I think in Vermont, where I live, the nearest big town is the town of Rutland, which is about a 45-minute drive from where I am. And on the way to Rutland, there's one other tiny little town called Wallingford, which you pass through inevitably on that journey. And I remember taking that trip once by myself, driving along in the car, and suddenly thinking, have I been through Wallingford? Had no recollection of it. And then as I drove on a little bit longer, I saw some landmarks which indicated that, yes, I had been through Wallingford. And I've thought since that if somebody had taken a photograph of me at the wheel of that car as I drove through Wallingford, they would have taken the photograph of a person who was not at that moment present in his life. And I think that's true of all of us to a degree, that we get through life somehow on automatic pilot, on cruise control, not really listening, not really seeing even those who are closest and nearest and dearest to us, but just getting through our lives. What I wanted to do in this little bit of a time is to, before I say that, let me say something else. People often say, when I've made this statement, how do you listen to your life? How do you get into the habit of doing it? How do you keep your ears cocked and your eye peeled for the presence of God or the presence of anything else? And one thing I've said, which I think is true, and that is pay attention especially to any of those moments in your life when unexpected tears come in your eyes. You never know when that may happen, what may trigger them. And very often, I think if you pay attention to those moments, you realize it's something deep beneath the surface of who you are, deep beneath the surface of the world as it is. Something is trying to speak to you about who you are and so on. I thought I would read, if I may, a selection from this little sort of a ABC that I wrote on the subject of tears. My idea was to take in this book called Whistling in the Dark a series of just ordinary words, most of them, a few religious ones, but mainly just plain words, and to try to listen to them in somewhat the same way that I'm suggesting one listens to one's own life, perfectly everyday words standing for perfectly everyday experiences, and to hear what perhaps lies beneath the surface of them. Here is the what I wrote about the word tears. You never know what may cause them. The sight of the Atlantic Ocean can do it, or a piece of music, or a face you've never seen before. A pair of somebody's old shoes can do it. Almost any movie made before the great sadness that came over the world after the Second World War can do it, at least for me. A horse cantering across a meadow, or the high school basketball team running out onto the gym floor at the start of the game. You can never be sure. But of this you can be sure. Whenever you find tears in your eyes, especially unexpected tears, it's well to pay the closest attention. They're not only telling you something about the secret of who you are, but more often than not, God is speaking to you through them of the mystery of where you've come from, and is summoning you to where, if your soul is to be saved, you should go to next. I think that's true, and if I were to give you an example of unexpected tears in my own life and what I think they were saying, I could tell you about how a couple of winters ago I went with my wife and our youngest daughter, who was whatever she was, about 21 or 2, to one of those great, I've forgotten, SeaWorld, I think it was called, or Marineland, one of those great sort of aquatic jamborees near Disney World in Orlando, Florida. And there was a lot of Mickey Mouse about it. Thousands of tourists and gag T-shirts and loudspeakers broadcasting music and so on. But the main show was fantastic. It was this enormous pool full of clear turquoise-colored water, and a couple of very beautiful young women and equally beautiful young men in tank suits standing up on the stage, so to speak, the platform jutting out into the water. And then all of a sudden the show begins, and these vast creatures, they call them killer whales, though I've never seen anything that looked less like a killer than those beasts. And they began to do their thing, shooting around through that water at 1,000 miles an hour, and leaping out of it with the sun glistening on their scales and their fins cutting through the surface of the water, and the young people somehow part of it with them, and this great dance of creatures and human creatures and sunlight and crystal water and the rest of it. And suddenly I found myself, of all things, with tears in my eyes. And I thought, good God, I know I'm neurotic, but I didn't think I was that neurotic. And what a shame, I thought, sitting at this thing with tears in my eyes. And then when it was over again, as a way of comforting myself, I thought I've got to tell somebody about it. So I said to my wife and my daughter that I had had tears in my eyes, and to my extraordinary comfort and great astonishment, they said they also had had tears in their eyes. And I wondered why. Why? And I think I know why. I think what happened was that we were remembering Eden. This marvelous dance of humans and beasts in joy and freedom, and God was certainly present there too, this great peaceable kingdom, this greenness and gladness and freedom from so many things that plague us. And it's where we all started from, I think, in some fashion, some odd way, and it's where, by God's good grace, we're all headed for. And just this glimpse of it was more poignant than grief, and something I've always remembered.